Good afternoon, and thank you for tuning in. I'm Greg Partain, Professor of Music at Transylvania and Chair of the Smith Series Committee. It's my pleasure to welcome you to today's artist discussion. As you might know, the Smith Series exists thanks to a generous gift from the late Dorothy K. Smith, who graduated from Transy in the 1940s with her husband Fred. It was Smith's vision that we present music of the highest caliber to the Transylvania community. And in that spirit, we've aimed high in every one of our 13 seasons. We've hosted such nationally and internationally renowned performers as the Chrono String Quartet, Chanticleer, Canadian Brass, Anonymous Four, and Conspirare, who presented Considering Matthew Shepard. Likewise, this year's artists, the American Spiritual Ensemble, come to us from out of the stratosphere. We can all be proud that such an acclaimed group is based right here in Lexington, although these brilliant musicians gather from all over the country to rehearse and tour. In the 25 years since their inception, and under the direction of their founder, Dr. Everett McCorvey, ASE has performed throughout the US and in multiple countries abroad, invariably inspiring audiences with their dazzling performances celebrating and preserving the Negro spiritual, that profoundly powerful, uniquely American musical genre. I want to thank Megan Maloney and her Office of Marketing and Communication staff for coordinating and advertising this year's Smith Series events. And of course, a very big thank you to this afternoon's speakers for generously spending time with us to share personal insights and to talk about the program. Now let me introduce Dr. Deidra Dennie, Transylvania's Vice President for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and a co-sponsor of this event. Dr. Dennie will introduce our guests and moderate this afternoon's discussion.
Thank you, Greg. Hello, everyone. We are so pleased that you could join us this afternoon. We hope you enjoyed the performance of ASE, a virtual concert experience featuring the American Spiritual Ensemble, conducted by founder and music director, Dr. Everett McCorvey, combined with narratives read by author Dr. Eileen Gunther from her recently published book, In Their Own Words, Slave Life and the Power of Spirituals, recorded partially at Transylvania University. If you would care to watch it again or to watch it for the first time, the stream is available until midnight tonight. Today, we welcome you to participate in our conversation. At the bottom of your screen, you will notice a Q&A link. Please type your questions in the Q&A box when it pops up. As the moderator for today's discussion, I will pose your questions to our panel at the end of the conversation. Closed captioning is also available for this event. Please click the double C's at the bottom of your screen. Well, I have the pleasure of introducing you to our artist panel today. First, Dr. Everett McCorvey, the founder and music director of ASE. He is a professor of voice at the University of Kentucky and the executive producer for University of Kentucky Opera Theater. Welcome, Everett. Next, Dr. Eileen Gunther. She is a professor of church music at Wesley Theological Seminary. She teaches music and worship courses, directs the chapel choir, and co-directs the chapel services. She has a new book, In Their Own Words, Slave Life and the Power of Spirituals. Welcome, Eileen. Last, Transylvania University's own Dr. Regan McNay. Hailing from the shores of Georgian Bay in Ontario, Canada, Regan pursued her graduate degrees at California State University, Long Beach, and the University of Kentucky before joining the faculty of Transylvania. As the director of choral activities, Dr. McNay, I turn this most esteemed panel over to you.
Thank you, Deidra, and welcome. It's so lovely to see everybody here and to see especially you, Everett and Eileen. Thank you for being here with all of us.
Well, thank you for having us. This is very exciting. We appreciate being on this afternoon.
This is great. I want to start by talking about the roots of this collaboration between you both. So Everett, I'm going to start with you. What need did you see in the community and society to form the American Spiritual Ensemble?
Well, when I grew up in Montgomery, Alabama during the Civil Rights Movement, and I had the great honor of, I didn't realize it at the time actually, how rich my growing up was, but we lived about a few blocks from Martin Luther King when he was living in Montgomery. My father was a deacon at the church where Reverend Ralph David Abernathy, who was Martin Luther King's assistant, was the minister. And so I had the great experience of growing up in that church and hearing and experiencing all the things going on as it related to the civil rights movement. And many of the iconic photos that you see of the civil rights movement in Montgomery, many of those that were taken from churches many were from my father's church, because Reverend King's church, Dexter Avenue in Montgomery, held about maybe 150, 200 people, whereas First Baptist held about 1,500 people. And so whenever they would have the Southern Christian Leadership Conference meetings or different meetings in planning, many of them were at First Baptist, where Reverend Abernathy was the minister and where my father was the deacon. And so, but there were great choirs that came through Montgomery in support of the civil rights movement. And I heard these great choirs at church and in concerts, and I will never forget the voices that I heard when I heard these choirs sing spirituals. And so when I started my professional career, I realized that I started noticing that these spirituals were being lost. And what was replacing them was a lot of, gospel music. Gospel music was really on the rise. And I just felt like these spirituals meant so much to me that I wanted to make sure that these spirituals were not lost. Martin Luther King loved spirituals, and he would quote spirituals a lot in his sermons and in his speeches. And so I felt like they were really the backbone of American music. And so I wanted to make sure that we kept that alive. So I started the American Spiritual Ensemble in 1995. And I started it with some of my students from the University of Kentucky and some of my professional friends, and realized very quickly that the demand was more than I could ask of students who were in school. And so it became very quickly a professional ensemble. And today we have members, the group has about 125 members on the roster, and they're from all over the country and several other countries as well. And so, and when it's time to tour, we all meet in New York City, we rehearse, and then we go out from there. And so it's been a great joy being involved in that group, and it's something that I look forward to every time we're together.
Amazing, amazing. Well, Eileen, you, as we've heard, you specialize in the kind of the history surrounding spirituals, and this absolutely incredible book of yours. And I wish you could sign for me. If we were in person, I would have you autograph my book.
I'd love to.
What instigated the creation of this book? What did you see the need for it?
Oddly, a little bit similar to what Everett said, although I grew up in another part of the country with a whole different set of childhood experiences. But I was teaching at Wesley Seminary, and I was asked to collaborate with a civil rights icon, in my view, Dr. William Bobby McLean, who is a fabulous preacher, a civil rights activist. He worked with Dr. King. So I kind of absorbed all of his inspiration. He said, "Oh, come teach with me." And I had a whole slew of CDs at that time. It was all before YouTube, when you could get anything quickly at your fingertips. including the ASE, which anyway, and DVDs. And then he said, oh, I gotta be gone. Take the next couple of classes. So I started researching. I was very aware of this music, but I hadn't actually put it in any organized form. I'd noticed from my church, I was at Founder United Methodist for many years, the Church of the Clintons and others, that spirituals had a greater emotional appeal than any other repertoire we sang. It was a great choir. There's nothing we couldn't sing, with some staff soloists as well as great volunteers. But spirituals connected with people in a way that no other music did. And so I was a big fan, and I started researching. I worked on directly on the book for about 10 years. But I did a lot of work before that as I was, formulating lectures for class. So the book is dedicated to Bobby McLean, who died just a couple of months ago. But he was able to come back to class as a guest, and I'm really wanting people to know of his amazing work.
Wonderful. Wow. Well, for those of us who may not be familiar with the relationship between slavery and spirituals, or haven't had the chance to see the concert yet, could you give us some background? Like, why do spirituals exist? Eileen, I'm gonna start with you, Eileen. I'm gonna get the ball.
This is a question that probably both of us could spend the rest of the time on.
Yes.
But spirituals gave hope when there was no reason for hope, and enabled those enslaved to keep on keeping on. And in a situation where they were not, it took a long time for them to be declared humans. And there was an argument about whether slaves could even be saved. Did they have souls? Were they human beings? And it started out there. So as the Great Awakening around 1800, a little after that, came to be, evangelists came to the South. They were finally allowed to evangelize the slaves. And first, the masters, the owners, didn't want that because they were afraid that if they heard the equality message, that would not be good for productivity. So they didn't want anybody to preach that, which of course was, they didn't. I mean, the preachers were very circumscribed in what they could say. But then they decided, they might be more productive workers if they were saved. They had to first determine that if they were baptized and joined a church, that would not equate to freedom, because that couldn't be. So once it was decided that there were civil laws and there were religious laws, and they were not the same, then it was allowed for them to be evangelized. And then the music came out of their life experience. I mean, just, everything that was part of life, from birth to death to punishment to plantation life to anything you can name, just like the African roots. Everything in life is codified in song, and it was for those who were enslaved as well.
Wow. Well,
and I will add to that if you think about when the enslaved were brought to this country, we're talking over 400 years. 1619 was the year that the first enslaved stepped foot on American soil. And they were not allowed to communicate. They were not allowed to speak their language. They were not allowed to bring their instruments. They had to learn and assimilate a whole new way of communication. And by the fact that they were allowed to attend church, another reason that they were allowed to attend church is because the slave masters felt that if they attended church, they would be more docile. And so as they learned about the scriptures, and they were not taught all of the scriptures in the Bible, and so they were only taught the ones that would play into this narrative of being docile. And actually, my wife had the great privilege. Maybe 2 years ago, we were in North Carolina, and she went to a museum there, and they actually had a slave Bible where all of the narrative that talked about freedom had been taken out of the Bible, so that the slaves would not know about those, those people. But of course, the slaves learned about that, and they realized that if God could take care of the least of those in the Bible, that surely he could take care of them. And so as they learned about these stories and these characters in the Bible, they went back to their own camps and made songs and created stories about these characters. And as they learned about Moses and the liberator that he was, let my people go. And so they went back and created stories. The other thing that happened that was very important is that as they were working in the fields, if you can imagine, 16-hour days of working from sun up to sundown, and singing was a way of getting through the difficulty of the day and the difficulty of the moment in the experience. And again, the slave masters realized that when the slaves sang, they produced more work. And so the slave master allowed them to sing. What the slave master did not know, however, was that not only were they singing to get through the day, they were also using it as a form of communication. And so, especially as the Underground Railroad was developed, and so it became a way that they communicated. And so the singing of these songs had so many meanings to help the enslaved to get through their difficult experience. And so we don't know who the author of these spirituals are. And so that's why on concert programs, when you see a spiritual, you will see it as arranged by a particular composer, because no one knew who originated these songs. And there are over 6,000 slave melodies passed down from generation to generation to generation. And not all of these have even been cataloged as of today. And so, but these melodies that have been cataloged, they are just melodies. And so arrangers, composers took these melodies and made them into the arrangements that we hear today and that the American Spiritual Ensemble sings.
Well, that's perfect. I'm now curious how the collaboration happened. So we have, the research and the scholar and the musician and the background. How did this incredible, it's basically a documentary concert is kind of really what it is. How did this come to be?
Well, it was really the grace of God that brought us together, and we were both involved in the ACDA conference in Rochester, New York. Was that last year, Eileen? I guess it was last year.
Back when concerts could happen.
When concerts were, it was right before the world shut down, actually. And one of the requests of us was to work together to fashion a concert that involved passages from her book and also the spirituals. And so we worked on that concert for almost a year, and we were able to present it at the ACDA conference in Rochester. And I tell you, it was in the form of a service, so that the choir directors who attended would be able to see how the narratives could be used and the music could be used and how they could be used together. And I must say, it was an incredibly powerful experience. And I knew from the first rehearsal, when Eileen read the first passages from her book, that we would be working together again. I just didn't know in what capacity. And because it was a powerful concert. And so after the concert, I talked with Eileen about doing another concert. Little did I know that the world was going to shut down. And so, as the world shut down, and we were trying to figure out ways to be able to continue to engage the artist and continue to collaborate, this idea of a concert came uh, together, and I called my friend Megan Maloney and asked her about some ideas, and she said, well, I have some ideas for you, because actually I did a commercial in front of the slave cabin that's in front of Transy, and I did that even before the film was ready. And Megan said, well, we would certainly love for you to consider engaging the Transy community when you do this. And I thought it was great. So I thank Megan Maloney for that idea, and all of the wonderful staff at Transy who helped to make it happen. It was a wonderful experience.
Wow. Well, thinking of the concert and the structure of it, where you take the audience through kind of these four main areas and four different kind of intentions of spirituals, I think one question is, why did you both feel the need to tell the story today? What is going on in our world that needs to have these spirituals?
I'll let you take that one, Eileen.
This is another one we could spend a very long time on. There is so much going on in the world that needs spirituals. We need them for our own spirituality and our own personal support. Spirituals are not just historic artifacts, they speak to us today. I was rehearsing with a student at the seminary, and he broke down in tears. Well, the song he was singing was "Sometimes I Feel Like a Motherless Child." And he is gay. He had just come out to his parents, and he had been told he was not welcome home at Christmas. So from that, I mean, the music just seared his soul, because it said exactly what he was feeling. When George Floyd cries out for his mother on that street in Minneapolis, that is the motherless child. The songs relate to us today. The treatment on the part of some police is not something that just happened in this century or decade or whatever. It goes back, as far as I know, at least as far as the slave catchers and the patrollers who were out to catch people who had either didn't have a pass and were going to a plantation supposedly without, permission, or if there was someone who had a pass and it got torn up because, oh, you don't have a pass anymore. There was no lamination available at that time. And so the view of law enforcement and the way it affects African Americans now and did then, it's a historic thing. And I think that matters. That means that we don't have just a little bit to fix. We have centuries to fix of mistreatment. And I just think it's required of us to do that. The reconciliation that happens, Dr. King in his "I Have a Dream" speech, the part that nobody knows, it's not the famous part, but he says to whites, "You sing free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, I'm free at last." And he tells African Americans to sing, "My country 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty," whether they're feeling that liberty or not, because singing can draw people into a different place. And I think spirituals have a power to be used for the reconciliation that our country needs and the world needs.
And it's very interesting, Eileen. You said that about your student, because the reality, and I say this a lot in the concerts when I'm talking to our audience about this music. People are enslaved in so many ways. You think about people are enslaved to drugs, people are enslaved to alcohol. I'm enslaved to food. But there are so many types of people are enslaved to abuse. I mean, there are so many ways that people are enslaved, and so there's something about this music that gives people a power to face whatever their enslavement is, and it gives them the power to work against that. It also gives them grace to give them permission to be able to speak and to walk and take a different path. And I've always wondered why, especially when we go to Europe or some other countries, why this music is so popular and so powerful. And I think it's that these hauntingly beautiful melodies resonate to people all over the world. And then even if they don't know the language, the melodies do something to you, to your soul. And I think that when you have the combination of beautiful melodies and then powerful, meaningful words, it's transforming. And so it's been, and I can't even count the number of concerts we've done over the past 25 or so years, but I can say that every concert I'm moved by something. It's either the singer's expression, the singer's intent of the words, the beauty of the power of the melody, what's going on in our world.
Mhm.
And, if you think of these melodies as being melodies that help the people through a difficult transition of being kidnapped and brought to this country, this music was also powerful during the civil rights movement, as Martin Luther King used this music and these spirituals and these words. And really, I look forward to what's going to come out of the Black Lives Matter movement in terms of music, because in a way you can think of spirituals as protest music, but it's protest music with beautiful melodies and powerful words, and stated in a very non-violent way. And but the music has a lot of power and meaning, and so that's been really special to me. Another thing that I would encourage our audiences to do, if they haven't had the time to do this, is go to the first Obama inauguration and look up the final prayer of Reverend Joseph Lowery, and listen to that prayer that he speaks. And what he does is he strings a group of spirituals, names of spirituals and names of anthems and names of hymns, things that were comforting to the enslaved, to help them to endure the difficulty that they were placed in. And he strings these together in a beautiful prayer. And if you didn't know spirituals, if you didn't know anthems, if you didn't know the great hymns of the church, you would just think, oh, that was a beautiful prayer. But in a way, it was a coded opportunity to let his ancestors know that they haven't been forgotten and their struggle has been recognized by the fact that America has come to the point to where they can elect their first African American president. And so these words and this music has power. And I think that because of that, this music will continue to resonate throughout our country and really throughout the world.
I agree.
If I can tag on to that, I think another reason is that a lot of the music is first person singular, but it didn't mean I as only me. It really meant we. So when the music was transformed in the civil rights movement, Ain't Gonna Let Nobody Turn Me Round, it started out as a religious song, but then they say, Ain't Gonna Let Chief Pritchett turn me around, Ain't Gonna Let the Dogs turn me around, Ain't Gonna Let the Water Hoses turn me around, and made it contemporary. And so it's music that has multi layers, and it brings people, it can bring people into a situation that it wasn't intended for, but it was protest music. So in a way, it always was intended for that.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I'm thinking of the images, the visual imagery that we're given in this concert, because it is a visual kind of palette as well. And there are all of the engravings, and there are the photographs, and then you have those musical moments where you have Victoria standing in that slave warehouse and singing "I Hear Music Over My Head." And I can't imagine the amount of work that went into crafting that. How did you two do that? Like, how did you?
Well, I have to thank Eileen for creating the outline. She had the areas that she felt were important to emphasize in the film, and I put together the musical part, and she wrote the script, and it worked really well. So by the time we were able to film at the Cincinnati Underground Railroad Freedom Center, and I want to thank them for their collaboration in this project. And they're going to be actually showing this film later on to their audiences, and I'm very excited about that. So we had the context of the script that Eileen had created by then. And of course, I visited the Freedom Center many times. And if you haven't visited the Underground Railroad Freedom Center, I would encourage you all to do, in Cincinnati, Ohio. And it's so poignant because, of course, in so many spirituals, as they sing about crossing the River Jordan, the River Jordan was the Ohio River. And so the Underground Railroad Museum sits right on the banks of the Ohio River. And that was the river that they were trying to cross. And so one moment that did not make it into the film, I'm sorry to say, and it more had to do just with the outside, it was overcast, but it was Nathaniel Thompson singing Deep River, and he was outside on the balcony of the Freedom Center overlooking the Ohio River. And we have the shot, but we didn't put it in the film just because of
An ouch for
yeah.
like an
Well,
ouch
we
feel.
yeah, we might do that and put it there, but it was just listening to him sing it was so powerful. But it was the same being in the slave pen, and the fact that she's singing over my head, there's music in the air, when in actuality over her head, if she had been enslaved, there would have been rows of enslaved people as they were held there until they were able to be sold. And so there's another moment in the film where Nathaniel is singing, and he sings in his concert wear on the stage of Transy, and then the next verse he's in the slave pen. And so those were just some really powerful moments, and it was powerful at the time of recording it. We had to do it I think it was a Monday or a Tuesday, because the museum was closed on those days. And so, but to be in the museum, which is a cavernous place already, and to hear those sounds coming out of the slave pen was really quite moving.
Well, Eileen, speaking of the excerpts that are chosen from this book, how did you choose what to showcase? Because there are so many affecting witness statements in this book.
Thank you. And there are. And first person statements have a power that is, I actually, in the book, I didn't want any of my words at all. I wanted it to be only the words of those who'd been enslaved. But other people said, no, you've got to provide context. You can't just do that. You have to, position the text in what else was going on. So therefore I wrote. But there's many, we could do lots of concerts, Everett, with a whole different set. And I've done a number of events, and I have figured out which quotes I feel are particularly powerful. I don't want to say way more powerful than others, because there are so many. And in the book itself, I've got another half a book in my computer.
Really?
Of quotes that, at some point you can barely lift it now. At some point, it was just getting to be too much. And it's overwhelming. I mean, they wrote more about punishment than any other single subject for very obvious reasons, but they sang more about liberation and freedom. So it's, I just chose, and I think I probably gave you some choices, Everett, and you said you'd like this one and
Mm-hmm.
how about that one. But we could do
Mm-hmm.
multiple concerts with whole different repertoire
Mm.
sung and a whole different set of first person narratives.
Oh,
Well, and the other thing that affected me greatly while we were putting the film together was that it was very heavy and very, very difficult. And I mean, I'd read Eileen's book by that time, and there are just some parts of Eileen's book that is just it's difficult to not only imagine but to even feel how that could have happened. And so as we were researching the graphics and the engravings and things, and then pairing that with the narratives that Eileen identified, and then putting that with music, it was overwhelming. So at some points in the film, we had to put in numbers just sort of to break the the whole harshness of it, so that and find opportunities to be just a little lighter, or I think we would have all just ended the film incredibly depressed.
I
wow.
probably should say parenthetically that the narratives come from two sources. There were 204 books written, book length documents written or dictated between 1789 and approximately emancipation by former or fugitive slaves. So those are their words. Solomon Northup, there is a film about him, for instance, and others that were part of that. Then you fast forward to 1936 to 38, the Federal Writers Project. Writers, teachers, all kinds of folk were sent to the South to interview those slaves that were still living, and there were approximately 100,000. They couldn't get to them all. Not all of them wanted to talk about slavery. Not all of them dared, because they could be living down the road from the people who had owned them, and they were dependent on them for whatever income they were scratching out. So some people didn't want to participate, and others said, "You want to talk about slavery? I'll tell you about slavery," and wouldn't stop. There are 2,300 of those interviews lodged now at the Library of Congress. They were taken down first and typed, and now they're digitized. So those are, it's not a metaphorical, their words. These are their words, to the best of the interviewers or the editor's ability to put them down, because slaves largely were not literate on purpose. And what they wanted most to do was learn to read so they could read the Bible. But if they did have literacy, then they could write. Otherwise, they would have dictated to someone, an amanuensis, someone who would have taken it down.
Well, this actually leads beautifully into another question that I know people are going to be interested in. So we know that slaves were kept uneducated for a reason. They were also taken out of their native languages and forced into the situation of English. And so a lot of spirituals that have been handed down have kind of a dialect to them. And there's discussion in the choral world about whether we should keep that dialect and sing it, or whether we should change them to standard English. Where do you fall?
Well, I'm a pretty and as you can imagine, I'm asked that question a lot.
I'm
Just
sure.
about everywhere we go, in every conference, and what I say to the choral directors when they ask is, now the language can be a barrier. It's more important to me that the spirituals are sung and the stories are told more so than if a choir sings it in a Black dialect. The reality is we don't speak like that anymore. I don't speak like that anymore. My choir doesn't speak like that anymore. And it has been the barrier that's kept mixed choirs or white choirs from singing this music. Now, the other thing that I say all the time is that this is American music. It was developed in a very difficult time in American history. But now this is American music. I even go as far as to call it the mother music. That and from the spirituals, many different art forms grew: jazz, blues, gospel. Even some parts of Broadway pop music. The whole area of call and response. All of that came out of the spirituals. So it's an important part of the fabric of American music. And so, in order for it to survive, I feel that all races have to sing this music. And if the language becomes a barrier, and you have a white choir director and you have a mostly white choir or all white choir, and they want to sing a spiritual, and then they see Eyes Gwine and see this Black dialect, they're not going to. It's not going to. It's not going to mesh. And so what will happen is they may sing it once and then lay it to the side. Whereas I think if we update the text, the dialogue, to where it's more of the standard English that we speak today, I think it removes that barrier. And so more people will then perform it. And so even with the American Spiritual Ensemble, we sing the standard English. And I might sing, we might sing a Gwine or some of the Black dialect on particular, pieces. But we don't do it as a wholesale. We update it to standard English. And I would encourage all choirs to do that, because it's more important that this music is performed and sung and kept as a staple in the American musical canon than it is to, sing the dialogue.
Well, it allows it to remain a living music and
Yes.
remain a means of expression of society, because that's partly what is the intention of this documentary, is how this reflects today. Yeah.
Well, and these spirituals come with stories. And so when someone's teaching a spiritual, they can also be teaching American history. They can be teaching about, civics. There's so much in this music that they can teach if they take the time to put the music in context, so that people understand, the students will understand why this music was formed, why it was sung, and the political, economic situation surrounding this music. And I think it gives the student a much deeper understanding of the history of our country.
I'd say that the balance between cultural appropriation and non has to do exactly with what you said. If people do the research, set the context, then they can be faithful to what it's about. Someone put on Facebook, "I'm looking for a fun spiritual," and I practically jumped through my computer screen because I'm going, you clearly don't know. There may be some more light-hearted, particular songs, but this is where they came from, folks, and you cannot deny it.
No, you can't separate those things.
No, and I think you cannot be faithful to the music. We research which Latin we're going to sing if we're singing Mozart versus Fauré.
Yes.
And there's lots of things, but performance practice of music, this is oral tradition, this is folk music. And performance practice somehow doesn't seem to take the high priority that it would for, Bach, Brahms, whatever, but it needs to. It needs to musically, whether you're going to soften ending consonants, what vowel sounds you're going to have, whether you're singing in standard, quote unquote, standard English, or if you're going to modify some. but you need to know, you can't just say this is folk music. Here, folks, do with it what you want.
Yes.
That is completely, in my view, unacceptable.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, I agree. You know, when this music was first born, and well, as people began to perform this music, you know, it was always the last number on a concert where everybody would bring out the, you know, the fun spiritual and you know, there are just so many more. And as people learn the, you know, where this music came from and the stories behind this music, it can give a much deeper meaning to the experience of the student. And something is happening nationally that I'm happy to talk about for a minute as a little commercial, I guess. Many colleges and universities in the country participate in an organization called NATS, the National Association of Teachers of Singing. And any university worth its salt will send their teachers and students to compete in the NATS conferences. Freshman women compete against other freshman women, you know, senior men compete against other senior men. So it really is a wonderful way as a state, regional, and national competition, but it's a wonderful way for the teachers to get to know each other. It's a wonderful way for the students to see how they stand, I guess, in their progression, you know, as a freshman soprano. How do I stand against other freshman sopranos in the country? But it's a wonderful organization, which I know the faculty at Transy are members, we at UK are members. Anyway, during COVID, one of the things that happened was that the NATS organization created a category for American Negro spirituals. And so now at the state, regional, and national level, there is an American Negro Spirituals category. And so just like the students compete in their musical theater category or classical music category, they'll be able to also compete in the Negro Spirituals category. And it's been exciting and somewhat surprising because we have found that we have to also educate the teachers in terms of the spirituals and which editions and, you know, which ones are spirituals as opposed to gospel, because there is a difference, and then helping so that the teachers can help the students. So we're actually going to hold some workshops where we will be able to talk about American Negro spirituals, but that one act alone is going to ensure that at least the young students in college, high school and college age students will have the experience of being introduced to spirituals, so that then as they grow up and they become teachers themselves, this will yet be another part of the American musical canon that they will be able to introduce to their students as they develop. So I'm very excited about that.
I I'd, I'd like to ask, seeing as we're talking about this wonderful concert, what happens now? Like, how do I access this incredible collaborative work that you two created? How can I access it? How can I share it with my students when I talk about spirituals in music appreciation class?
Sure. Well, one of the things we're going to do first, because of the success of this collaboration, you know, I'm already talking with Eileen about another one, and we're going to keep this going. I think all of us are experiencing now the change in our lives as it relates to videotaping and video concerts and things like that. So we will shoot another one. And until then, it will be on the American Spiritual Ensemble website, where people will be able to access the website and find the concert. And then it's sitting on a Vimeo site, and they'll be able to go to that site and rent the concert and see it.
Well, thank you both so much for talking with me today. It's been wonderful, and I really enjoyed this.
Thank
Well,
you.
thank you for having us. We are very excited, and thank you to Transy and Deidra. Thank you to you and your your team for making this possible, and we're just so honored that Transy has come on board to help us to share the message of this music.
Thank you both so much for your time this afternoon. The Q&A was open and you answered questions during the conversation with Regan, which is just spectacular. So thank you so much for your time today. We want to also thank our audience today for spending some time with us. It was great. We hope you enjoyed it. Again, if you haven't seen the concert, please take some time and watch it. You will be moved. It was absolutely fabulous. So from Transylvania University, thank you all very much and good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.